Hello, everyone. People are starting to connect, so we'll wait for a few minutes just for some more people to join us. We're very happy to have you all here. Perfect. So we're gonna start. أنا اسمي ريما، صار لي 11 سنة بكندا، وبدي أقول لكم عن جد welcome و thank you for being here with us. And I want to thank Encubate, Maria, who's here with us, for making this session possible. So we really hope that this session will be useful for you. I want to just take a quick moment to talk about the Zoom etiquette and the logistics of the webinar. So the session will be in English and it will be recorded. So the recording is already on. Your cameras will be off and the microphones muted during the presentation part. But you will be able to ask your questions live in the Q&A part. So basically you have the chat box, you can write there. And we have at the end of the session, the Q&A. So you can type your questions in the chat box anytime. Some questions of yours might be answered throughout the presentations, and other questions you can either address them, we can either address them at the end, or maybe later on, if we don't have the answer, we'll write back to you. So this is one of the many webinars of SILA, but we always organize other webinars. So stay tuned to see workshops or webinars related to immigration or to integration to Canada. At the end of the session, we are going to share a feedback form with you so that we get your opinion on the webinar and maybe other topics that you would like us to tackle. So please take a moment to fill it out. Now I'm going to tell you about SILA. Maria, if you can just change the slide.
I think it's already there, right? About SILA slide, yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, that's it. That's the one. Sorry. So SILA stands for Support and Integration for Lebanese Abroad, Soutien et Intégration des Libanais à l'étranger. نحن مسجلين بمونريال، بس أسسنا الأورجنايزيشن تبعنا بعد ما صار الانفجار ببيروت، وكلنا volunteers جروب صغير عم نجرب قد ما فينا نساعد يلي حابين يجوا على كندا. We provide support in 3 areas: immigration to Canada, integration for newcomers, and intercultural exchange and growth. So أكيد نحن ما بنعمل وراء الإيميجريشن، بس إذا عندكم سؤال عن الموضوع فينا نساعدكم، بس أغلبية الوقت نتعامل مع immigration consultants مثل اليوم Encubate معنا، لأن هن يلي مؤهلين ليعملوا هيدا الشيء، عندهم certification بالموضوع. بالنسبة للintegrations، الانتجريشن نعمل كتير ويبينارز خاصة ب شو الواحد بيعمل وقت يوصل على كندا، كيف شو الاشياء اللي لازم يعملها على وصلته، بنساعد بقصة المدارس، وين الواحد بده يسكن etc. والintercultural exchange and growth نعمل event in person. So هلا الابكمينج ايفنت تبعنا هو البيكنيك. So رح نجتمع كلنا ببارك بمونريال وبنتعرف على بعض and we exchange. You can follow us on our Facebook page and Instagram. So this is where you can see our news and what our upcoming webinars are and activities. And you can also contact us via the form on our website. And also, if you are a resident, you can fill out the membership form. And you can also stay in touch by becoming a volunteer if you are interested in supporting us. So جويلا حتحط هلا اللينكس تبعنا كرمالتا إذا بدكم تروحوا تعملوا لنا follow or like and to check our different social media pages. So with us today we have Maria Garces. She's from Encubate. Maria is a regulated Canadian immigration consultant who joined Encubate in October 2019 and has since then specialized in a wide range of immigration services to help her clients meet their immigration goals. So thank you, Maria, for sharing with us today important insights and tips during this free session. So we're really grateful for you to give your time for us. And for all of you with us today, if you feel you need more support in immigration-related matters, please don't hesitate to contact Encubate directly to book a consultation. So we will put now all the contacts of Encubate for you to be able to reach them. So now the floor is yours, Maria, if you want to take it from here.
Thank you. Thank you, Rima, for the introduction, and it's our pleasure to be here. Perfect. I think that was a pretty good introduction, but I'll just quickly introduce who we are. And just like Rima said, we're going to be discussing in detail all the tips and recommendations that we have when preparing study permit applications to Canada, specifically for those outside, but then we'll also cover applications from inside Canada. So just like Rima mentioned, my name is Maria Garces. I'm a regulated Canadian immigration consultant. And although I've initially started with Encubate in our consultations and solutions team, as I gain interest into the legal immigration field of Canada and educated myself further on it, I became an RCIC and now work with both our legal and consultations team with specific focus on economic immigration. But I've also helped many clients in their study permit, work permit, and permanent residency applications to Canada. Also a quick introduction of our principal consultant, Mr. Basil Sauter, and founder of Encubate, also an RCIC who has over 10 years of experience in both US and Canadian immigration. Also specialized in economic-based immigration, has helped many, many clients from all over the world to obtain their permanent residency or even citizenship to Canada. And this is our show-off slide. And the main reason we like to share this slide here is to mention the fact that, and this is our team, by the way, we're all spread across our offices that I'll share in a second. But we like to show this slide because most of us initially came to Canada as temporary residents or through a permanent residence pathway option. And we all came in a different way, which comes to say that there is always a solution. There is always a pathway for every tailored case. One size does not fit all when it comes to immigration. And that's why if you're really considering and trying to assess your immigration needs, and sorry there, oh, there we go. You can still see my slide, right? Yes, okay, perfect. Yeah, if you're trying to come and consider your immigration needs, then we highly recommend that you come and or talk to someone who's specialized about it. Now, really, really quick, we have 3 licenses on file with our team, and we are also regulated and authorized to represent you in Quebec related immigration applications. As we will talk throughout the presentation, Quebec does require a special, let's call it approval from their own Ministry of Immigration. So we do have the license to assist you with that as well, which comes to say that we can assist you, represent you with all Canada-wide related immigration applications. And we have 4 offices at the moment in Canada, our main one being in Toronto, Vancouver, where I am located, Calgary, and Montreal as well. But we can definitely assist you from wherever you are around the world. And just like this webinar, we have a lot of sessions that we carry out through our partners and also with SILA a few times a year, where we discuss the latest immigration updates. We provide you with insightful information that you may need to prepare your applications. But again, if you have any detailed questions about your specific case, we'll try to go through them today. If it gets too in detail, I'll make sure to leave our contact details so you can reach out later on to, and we discuss your case further. Perfect. And almost done with introduction here. Just also want to mention that we offer our services in English, French, Spanish, Arabic, and Portuguese as well. So if you feel more comfortable speaking in any of these languages, we'll be happy to assist you with our services in this language. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and dive into today's topic. What I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to be focusing on study permit applications to Canada. Before we do so, it's very important to understand what are the type of permits and authorizations that we require to come to Canada as an international student. For starters, study permits are required if you're coming to study any program that is over 6 months in duration. So IRCC does not count weeks, they count days. So the equivalent to 180 days or 6 months. And we will require that if we're coming to study an academic or a language program. So the duration, if it's over 6 months, will require one. Now, in the case of Quebec, if we are planning to come to the province of Quebec to study, we also need to ensure that we apply for what we call a CAQ, which is a certificate or approval from the province. Again, only for programs which are 6 months or more in duration. If you're coming to study for a program that's 4 months, then there's no CAQ nor study permit required. What's also very important is that whenever you apply for a study permit from outside Canada, you will get 2 main documents. One is your study permit approval letter, and the second one is your TRV, your temporary residence visa, which will be stamped on your passport. Upon arrival to Canada, you will get your study permit printed at the border based on that study permit approval letter. And what will actually allow you to travel to Canada is the TRV. I'll show you in the next few slides, but it's important to keep this in mind because one document will give you status and authorization to study and work in the country, while the other one will give you authorization to travel. So you have to make sure that whenever you travel outside Canada, you maintain both up to date and they're valid. And again, we'll dive into this a little more. And if you have other nationalities or if you are from an ETA country, there's a list of countries that are eligible for electronic travel authorization, which is an easier alternative to the TRV. You get to apply online and gets processed within hours, if not minutes. And it is visa free, it does not get a stamp in your passport, but again, it is only for specific countries. So how does a study permit look like? Things that you have to consider and keep in mind when you come to Canada. And again, we're gonna look into the specific requirements and our recommendations to build that study permit application, but I wanna get you familiarized with what the study permit is. So first, it looks similar to this. They've updated upgraded the paper, so the background looks a little different. But as I said, you will be receiving this upon entry at the airport if your application was submitted from outside Canada. And things to keep in mind when you get it printed here. On the top right here, you'll find the document number, which would be requested later on for future applications. So always make a digital copy of your permits. Your UCI is your unique client identifier number, which is your client number with the government of Canada. And then what's most important is upon printing it, make sure that the officer has not made any mistakes on your permit. You'll be surprised of the amount of time that this happens. So always check the dates. If the date that gets issued, the validity date that gets issued is shorter than your program of studies, you should bring it up to the officer on the spot and say, hey, based on my letter of acceptance, my validity should be longer. And it's up to the officer's discretion to say, no, stay with what you have and submit an extension later on, or they will fix it on the spot, up to the officers. But also very important to always check your conditions. Make sure that if you are indeed authorized to work in Canada because of the type of program that you're attending, make sure that there's no prohibition on your conditions there. And if you have any question on any of the conditions, you can always ask the officer and they'll explain further.
Can I just add here? I don't know if
Yes.
you will tackle this.
Let me go back.
Before, the students were allowed only 20 hours of work. Now they're allowed 40 hours, which is amazing because they are able to make more money and contribute to paying their fees on the ground. So that's an important aspect. I don't know if this applies only to Quebec or to other provinces.
So that's a measure. We'll tackle it in the next slides, but it's a temporary measure that applies all across Canada. But there's a really fine print that IRCC added after the public policy was announced. So we'll go through those requirements, but it's still in place and applies to all provinces. But I'll make sure to tackle it in the work authorization part. Thank you for bringing that up. Perfect. And then if we're coming to study in Quebec, this is what a CAQ would look like, or at least the approval letter that you will receive once it's processed. Also important things to consider is an application number, but always check the validity date. You must have a valid CAQ throughout the entire duration of your studies. If, again, it gets issued for a shorter period, then we'll have to submit a new one way before it expires to make sure that it covers the entire duration of the program. And we're going to look into the requirements and the details of CAQs in the next few slides. But also check throughout the end of the document, you'll see a paragraph that mentions the actual validity of it. Sometimes we get it issued to, let's say, October 31st. But in reality, it does say here, for example, your certificate remains valid for obtaining your study permit should your registration be postponed to one more intake. So if your intake then actually gets postponed to the next term, then the CAQ will remain valid, but we need to make sure that it's mentioned there. And we'll cover this more in detail in the next few slides. Now, this is what a TRV, a temporary residence visa, looks like. This will get stamped and printed on your passport. And what I was mentioning, this is what will allow you to travel. The study permit that you get issued at the airport will give you status and authorization to study and work in Canada. But if you want to leave Canada and come back, you need to do so with a valid TRV. The study permit does not guarantee you entry. So always make sure that it is valid throughout the entire duration of your travel. And if you need to renew it, you can do so from inside Canada. It's a really fast application that you can submit from inside. You may also get stamped upon entry. This is mainly if you're coming initially as a visitor. If you're coming as a student or as a worker, we're starting to see that officers do not really stamp your passport. But if you're coming initially as a visitor, there's a good chance that you get a stamp on your passport. Always check the date that it is stated under your entry date. Why? Because officers may grant you more time depending on what type of studies or type of permit you're coming under. But if you're coming in as a visitor, they may also issue less time. When we come as visitors initially, we're given 6 months of stay in Canada, but the officer can shorten that to any period that he or she feels like. Although it's unlikely, it's possible. So always check your stamp and make sure that you respect the authorized date that you're given upon entry. All right. Now, there is a really, generally speaking, applying for study permit applications must be done outside Canada. We need to submit an application from outside to an embassy abroad. But there is a way for you to apply for an application for a study permit from inside Canada. So inside Canada applications are highly recommended if you're eligible for them because the approval rate is quite high compared to those from outside Canada. It requires us less documents to submit, such as proof of ties, proof of establishment in our home country. And generally speaking, they tend to get processed faster than from outside. So if we're eligible to apply from inside, it is highly recommended. Now, there's a specific requirement that we need to meet in order to be eligible to apply from inside, and that is with a conditional letter of acceptance. So a conditional letter of acceptance means that we've been partially or conditionally admitted to an institution, to a program, and that we would be fully admitted once certain conditions are met. This is these conditions could be a preparatory course, or they could be a language preparation course, which is the most common way that we see in this type of applications. This can be an English as a second language, ESL, or French as a second language, FSL course that we have to complete in certain weeks. Let's say, for example, 3 months of language preparatory course that will prepare us to reach the level that we need to start the academic program later on. So once the language part has been completed, has been met, we'll submit the results to the school, and the school will give us a non-conditional letter of acceptance. And once we have that letter, we can go ahead and submit the study permit applications from inside Canada with the conditional letter of acceptance, showing to the officer that we did the preparatory course, we met the conditions that were stated in the initial letter of acceptance, and we are now fully admitted into the program. Once we submit an application from inside Canada, if we submit it within the 6-month period that we have as visitors, then we can go ahead and remain in the country until a decision is made. We enter in a status that's called maintained status. So you don't have to leave the country when you submit your application from inside Canada, as long as you submit it before the expiry date of your status. So if you arrive, let's say January 1st, and we have until June 30th to leave the country, for example, as long as we submit a study permit application from inside Canada before June 30th, we remain with valid status, even if it goes beyond that date, okay?
Maria, the
Yes.
program, if you already speak French or English, do you still have to follow that program? Because 3 months is a long time.
Right. So it will depend on, because each university and each academic program has a different language requirement. So if, for example, you're just looking to push your level a little bit, and you only need to take a few weeks, then that's completely fine. But it will be assessed by the school, by the university, whether you meet the level requirement, and they will be the ones who determine how long of the language program you'll have to take to meet it. But if you already fully speak proficient English and French, then unfortunately you will not qualify for it, because you're not going to repeat your language proficiency tests or course if you are already proficient at it, right? So this is for those who are about or have not met yet the language requirement for an academic program. Perfect. Now, for Quebec, we looked into the sample of the CAQ, but these are the main takeaways that you need to keep in mind if you're planning to come to study in Quebec. My French is non-existent, so I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce it, but it's pretty much an acceptance, a certificate of acceptance from the province. It is submitted online, and it has to be submitted and obtained prior to obtaining the study permit. So if we're coming to study in Quebec, keep in mind that we'll need an additional 2 to 3 months to get that CAQ to later on apply for the study permit. Unfortunately for Quebec, we cannot submit a CAQ with a conditional letter. So here we need to be fully admitted into the program. The application gets fully submitted and processed online nowadays, and we also get all the correspondence back online too. And a few requirements here is that for certain countries, we may be required to show health insurance, proof of purchasing health insurance for the duration of our studies. It needs to be student insurance. And for other nationalities, you will also may be required to show proof of financials that you meet and you have enough financials to cover the cost of your studies, which is a requirement that, as we'll see, it's still in place for study permit applications. Okay, we must be enrolled full-time, and the full-time gets determined by the school, not really by RCIC. So in our letter of acceptance, it will be specified whether that's a full-time or a part-time program. And CAQ processing times, as of right now, I'm seeing 20 to 30 days. If there's any what we call requests for informations, RFIs that get issued throughout the process, and it could be delayed, but generally speaking, I'm seeing 3 to 4 weeks of processing times for CAQs right now, and we get our approval online. Once we have the approval, the letter of approval from the CAQ, we can go ahead and submit the study permit application. But please keep in mind that if you submit a study permit applications for studies in Quebec and you do not have a CAQ, that application will get refused. So again, give yourself enough time if you're planning to come study in Quebec to first apply for the CAQ and later on for the study permit. Okay, now on to the work authorization, which is in line with what Rima was asking at the beginning of the presentation. Some key terms here. While we are language students in Canada, so we're studying English or French as a second language program, so not an academic program, we are not authorized to work in Canada at all. However, if we are enrolled in an academic program, any post-secondary program that it is at least 6 months in duration, we can work off campus in the following ways. During our studies, so while we attend classes, we can work up to 20 hours per week, which is considered part-time. During the breaks, which could be summer break, spring break, Christmas break, we can work full-time, which is, there's no a maximum of full-time, but over 20 hours per week. And if your program has a co-op placement and internship during this period, we can work also full-time or over the 20 hours per week. Now, there's currently a public policy in place that was introduced by RCIC last year that exempts students from having the cap of the 20 hours per week while they study. However, when this public policy was introduced, there were no conditions, there were no requirements to be met. They just pretty much said you can come as a student and you can work over 20 hours per week until December 31st of this year of 2023. However, as a public policy got in place, we started to see more and more requirements. And as of today, the requirements for someone to be able to work over 20 hours per week is that you must have applied or have a valid study permit issued by RCIC on October 7th of 2022, meaning that for any new applications that you submit going forward, unfortunately, you will not benefit from this public policy. But if you're a student currently in Canada and you had a study permit or you had submitted a study permit application by October 7th of last year, you may be eligible to work over the 20-hour cap. Okay. Something very important, especially if you're considering immigrating in the future, is that experience that you obtain as a student in Canada does not qualify for immigration purposes, specifically for the Canadian Experience class. This is something that may be considered for provincial programs, but for immigration, specifically for the express entry system, it's something that it's not considered. So just keep that in mind. And we'll be talking a little bit more in the next slides about immigration PR options after graduation. So don't worry.
Just a quick question. Yeah, that's it. So, but it might be considered if you want to get your work permit.
Yes, so this is experience that you can demonstrate to officers that you're qualified to perform the job because you had obtained paid work experience. That's completely fine, but not necessarily for obtaining points for immigration programs in the future, correct? Perfect. All right. Now let's dive into what are the main reasons that we see for refusals in study permits. And then the next slide, I'll go into tackle each of the factors that we need to consider when preparing a study permit application to Canada. So I'm not gonna go through all of them. I'll read the main ones here. Number one, it's a very common one we see, which is lack of ties to your home country and proof of return. Please, this is very important to understand that whenever we're applying for any type of temporary residence to Canada, our intentions at the time of application need to be temporary. What this means is that we need to demonstrate to the officer that we're going to be a bona fide student, that our true interest of coming to Canada at that point of time is to pursue our studies. And for that, we need to really emphasize how we're going to come back home and what ties us back to our home country to be able to return after our studies. whether you remain in Canada afterwards, after you study, you apply for your post-graduation work permit, you apply for your permanent residence, that it's not any sort of contradiction and you would not be punished for anything like that. But what's important to understand is at the time of study permit application, our intentions need to be merely to come and study that specific program that we've been admitted to in Canada. Okay, and we'll show examples of how to tackle this in the next slide. Another very important one is your study plan. Whenever we prepare a study permit application, make sure that we provide a strong study plan that shows our intentions of coming to Canada. How does that program relate to our previous education, or how does that program, how is that program going to benefit us in the future, in our future career opportunities back home? Another one is the Canadian education level is lower than previously obtained education. This is something that could get tackled in many ways, but generally speaking, what I recommend clients is to come study a program in Canada that it's somewhat in line to what you have already previously studied or what you have previously worked at. And if there's no correlation in that term, in that sense, we need to find a way to relate that program that we're coming to study in Canada with at least what we intend to do in the future. So try to always find that link and build a story that makes sense to the officer. And lastly, a very big one, unfortunately, is the lack of financials or just financials in general when it comes to study permit applications. We need to make sure that we are demonstrating enough funds to cover our studies in Canada. And unfortunately, for study permit applications, we need to show that our funds have been available there for at least 4 months. This can be done through bank statements, also submit proof of employment, submit proof of how you obtain those funds. And again, provide enough documentation to the officer that proves that those funds are readily available there for your use in Canada. And they're not just there for demonstration purposes, as in you're not going to have to rely on your employment in Canada to pay and cover your study expenses. Okay. Lastly, also very important, just mention here point 10, just please don't lie, don't try to hide anything when you apply to study permit applications to Canada. Countries like Australia, US, UK, New Zealand do share all the information. So if you've had any previous refusals to any of these countries, Canada will know. Don't try to hide it because you think that it will negatively impact your application by lying or by saying, no, I have no previous refusals. It's how we can get ourselves into misrepresentation and actually be banned from Canada for 5 years. So never lie in an application. Now, what are the factors that we need to consider when building a study permit application? Let's start with the first two up here, which are ties to home country and return to home country. When it comes to ties to home country, what I was just mentioning is as a temporary residency application, we need to prove to the officer that we'll be coming back after completion of our studies. So, for example, current status, are you currently living in a country where you're not citizen of? If so, what's your status there? Would you be able to come back to that visa that you have? We need to set a country of return. That does not necessarily have to be your country of citizenship, could be your country of residence, but make sure that you can prove that you can come back to that status upon completion of your Canadian studies. Employment records are also very important. So we see in a lot of cases, for example, people that are coming to Canada as part of their employment career, their employer is giving them the option to come study for 1-2 years and will be hired back upon return. It's not very often that it happens, but it's something that we see too. Also, what are the economic ties that you have to that country? What are your assets, investment, lands, properties? Make sure to show all of them because that shows that you're financially and economically established in that country. And also family and children. Yes.
Yeah, Maria, we have a question with regards to financial support.
Okay.
So Rachel is asking, how do we answer the following question? Since you have enough funds to come to Canada, why don't you complete your studies in your country?
Right.
So maybe someone has received already that kind of answer in their letter.
It sounds like it, yes.
And also it says maybe a private institution in your home country have a similar study program as the one you chose.
Right.
So I guess this is a new thing because let's say if you want to study engineering and you want to come to Canada, of course, there's other universities in Lebanon that provide that kind of study.
Right.
But how it's like it's a conundrum, like, but we want to study in Canada because the universities are better rated because
Right.
the opportunity to work abroad, let's say, if not necessarily in Canada, let's say in Dubai or in wherever,
Exactly.
it's going to be better for the person. So
yeah, this is where we have to get creative. And it's indeed, I believe, number 8 could be in line with that, which is cost of obtaining Canadian diploma is not justified with future employment opportunities in home country. It is among those lines. But to answer your question, it's something that needs to be reflected on your study plan. So what I would suggest in these situations is to look in depth into your Canadian program, the program that you're coming to study here, dissect it and really emphasize what are the courses that you're really interested in that, or that you find that these won't be available back home. So start by the actual content of the program. Second on research into the university, the college, the type of awards or ranking that it may have within Canada, but also worldwide. Another one is the fact that you would be fully immersed into another language living, not just academic wise, but also in your day-to-day basis. And the high cultural exposure that you will be in Canada. And these are facts that you can find in every university and college website that says X amount or percentage amount of our students are international from these countries. So take all these facts and put them in a way that they will be benefits that you'll have later on upon completing, like you said, employment opportunities abroad. What are the requirements that some multinational companies ask you for? Do they require you for a specific training or a specific education in countries abroad? Or what's the likelihood of getting hired? Like, is there a higher likelihood of getting hired if you've studied in Canada or abroad from your home country? So I'd say that really look into the program, the university, and match it with what you intend to do after you graduate. Also the fact that, and this is something that it's tricky and it requires a lot of research and work, but could work, which is, yes, I'm going to invest X amount of funds into my education, but by upgrading my education in this and this and this way, I'll be able to land a higher position upon graduating and return to my home country, which will cover my investment in X amount of years. I expect to earn this much more money. And even here, I've suggested to certain clients to, for example, include job prospects from LinkedIn, Indeed, any of these job searching engines where you can find expected salary ranges for that specific position. So that's again, we can get very creative about this and we look at this case by case, but I'd say those are the main tips and tricks I can give in regard to that.
Thank you. I just want to, because I'm the timekeeper.
Yes.
So we still have 20 minutes and we want to leave a bit of time for the questions.
Yes.
So just maybe we can go through the next steps quickly.
Perfect. Okay. So, and yes, because I agree, we'll interact a lot with the questions. Something, and again, we've covered the return to home country with that answer, I believe, too. Just want to quickly touch on the financial support because it's a very important one. Very important to show the source of your funds. If you've been saving certain amount of money for your studies in Canada, has this been because of the sale of a property? Has it been because of an inheritance? Has it been because of your current employment? If so, show us the documents of these transactions, show us the pay stubs, show us the employment reference letter, show where the funds come from, because that will make you that will make it automatically a much stronger application because you're showing to the officer, obtain these funds legitimately, and this is the way I've done so. Job reference letters help a lot as well. And please, very important, if there are any large deposits explain what it's coming from. Again, is it the selling of a property? Show me the documents of that transaction. And do not use third-party company bank accounts. You can use sponsors. We recommend for sponsors to be close family members so that you can prove to the officer that you have direct access to that money, but do not use company bank accounts because the officer will question how are you going to access those funds. Okay. Perfect. If you have any previous refusals, do not file right away. We highly recommend to get an ATIP, which is what I will show you in the next couple of slides, and check the officer's notes. And do not reapply if you're not ready to fix the comments that the officer raised. So get the ATIP. Try to dissect all the comments. If you need help with this as well, we offer this service too, so we'd be happy to help. And then we build an application based on those comments. But again, we won't tell you to refile right away. We'll tell you to improve your circumstances based on those comments. And once you're ready to provide new documents, we'll go ahead and refile your application. However, if there was any administrative error or it was an officer's mistake, the reason of your refusal, you can appeal, or it's not really an appeal, but the equivalent of the appeal process, which is called judicial review with the federal court. So your case will be brought to the federal court and a judge will determine whether that case gets reopened and assessed by another officer or not. And this you can do so within 15 days if you apply from inside Canada or 60 days if you apply from outside. And I am just going to skip to the next one, which is, this is an example of an ATIP report. So you'll submit an ATIP report if you receive a study permit refusal, and you look at the officer notes, because in the initial refusal letter, you will only see main reasons of refusal, whereas in the ATIP notes, you'll actually see the officer's notes here. So you'll see in detail the real reason of the refusal. And then based on these notes, you can go ahead and understand what was the reasoning behind the officer's refusal grounds. Okay, I'm going to be able to provide this, and this document, and I can go ahead and resubmit my application. ATIP requests nowadays are taking 30 to 45 days to be issued. Okay, perfect. And lastly, I am going to briefly touch what are potential permanent residency options that you may have once you graduate. Again, this is a very big overview because today's webinar was specific for study permits. But generally speaking, you may immigrate to Canada through one of the federal programs, specifically through the Express Entry system, which has many programs and it's point-based. This is for outside of Quebec. For Quebec, we have their own program, which is their ARIMA system or their PEQ programs. ARIMA is also point-based, but again, focused on Quebec, and we require French. And lastly, we can also immigrate with the support of a province. If you come to study, specific provinces have dedicated programs for international graduates if they are for public institutions. And here we'll get additional points for that nomination that later on will allow us to apply for permanent residency. In line with this is the education that we obtain in Canada. If we immigrate through a federal program, we can get between 15 to 30 points for studying in Canada. And later on, we can get extra points with experience that we obtain after graduation with our post-graduation work permit in qualified occupations up to 60 points. Lastly, looking into the specific provincial programs, the one that I do want to focus on is the last one, which is the studies in province. As I said, certain provinces, well, all provinces actually have international student programs, international student stream for graduates who complete studies at least that are 8 months in duration in that province. It needs to be at a post-secondary level and it needs to be academic. In a public institution, and again, this is for outside Quebec. Quebec has its own one. So just before we jump into the questions, we offer consultations. I'll leave our details in the last slide. We offer consultation, study permit application services as well, and you can contact us directly. No need really to schedule a consultation just yet. What I would recommend if you're interested in looking for our help is to contact us with an overview of your case, your circumstances, and then we'll let you know how we can help you here. And now we'll jump to the questions. I see the chat quite popping here. There's a lot of questions that I see, so I can go ahead and start answering them.
So
yes.
We're going to start off with a question from Rachel that she asked previously, but now we can allow it more time. So obviously, this session is addressed to Lebanese, and we have a situation in Lebanon with regards to the economical problems that we've been enduring. So how do we provide a proof of funds, knowing that the people don't trust the banks anymore, so they don't deposit their money there anymore, but there are residents of Lebanon. Of course, this applies to all programs of immigration when it comes to Lebanese people.
Yes. So unfortunately, it gets tricky. I'm not going to lie, for Lebanese national to prove in funds. I am very well aware of the situation. Some alternatives that we found to having to demonstrate the funds in a Lebanese bank account is looking for sponsors that may be outside Canada and that have the funds outside Canada, proving that relationship to the sponsor, and the bank statements could definitely help. Something that you can also do to reduce the total funds to demonstrate, it's to pay your funds upfront to the school. So that means that then you will only have to demonstrate the 10,000 Canadian dollars if you're coming on your own for living expenses, and you will no longer have to demonstrate the tuition fees for the first year. So that's a way also to reduce the funds. And I see that Rachel's asking a follow-up question here. The sponsor can be, yes, the sponsor can be inside Canada. Just make sure to be able to demonstrate that relationship to them. And indeed, if they're inside Canada, it would be easier to demonstrate the access to those funds. Just make sure again that you demonstrate that relationship. But just going back to other alternatives that we can show is, if you have the chance of opening a foreign bank account, also do so. Or if not, try to demonstrate the minimum through the bank statement. So the 10,000, assuming that we've paid the fees upfront, and proof of compensation. So how are you receiving your funds? Although you're cashing them or keeping them in cash, show to the officer that you've been receiving your funds, you've been employed, and that you've been saving. But to the situation, you try to minimize the amount of funds that you keep on the bank account. Okay.
Perfect. So I encourage you guys to write your questions in the chat box, but we're going to start answering questions that were already sent to us when people registered. So I'll start off with one. Can my family members accompany me if I'm coming to study in Canada?
Yes, absolutely. So this will depend on the type of institution. We need to ensure that it is in a public institution, public DLI. And this is something that you can check directly with the school. They'll let you know if they're public or private. But if they're public, you can apply for an open work permit for your spouse, which is great because then your spouse will be able to work full-time, as many hours as they want per week while you study, and you can work those 20 hours. And your kids, if they are over the age of 5, they'll be able to get study permits and attend public colleges, public secondary and elementary schools at no cost. So they will not have to pay for tuition fees for their children. Okay. However, if the school is private, then we have to make the decision of whether they come as visitors, or you can run the risk of applying for an open work permit for your spouse. It may get approved or it may get refused, but it is definitely more guaranteed if you're coming to a public institution.
Perfect. Another question. Do I get permanent residence automatically after completing my program?
Yes, and I actually get this question a lot. It's a big misconception, I'd say. The short answer is no. There's nothing automatic when it comes to immigration to Canada, but there's definitely it facilitates the options that you have. It gives you definitely more options to immigrate if you're coming to study to a public institution. So it will give you access to the provincial programs, like we mentioned. All provinces and territories do have a program specifically for international students. And if you're planning to immigrate through the federal system, it will give you points for studying in Canada, but it will also give you the opportunity to apply for that post-graduation work permit afterwards. And it's the way in which you utilize the post-graduation work permit that will make the difference on your permanent residency options. You have to ensure that you work at least for 30 hours per week in a qualified occupations for the duration of 1 year. So yes, you have access to that work permit, but make sure that you find a job that it's in a qualified occupation and you work for there for at least 1 year.
You know, that question gets asked a lot because a few years back, it was possible to get the permanent residency while you are studying. So because things change so much and so quickly, the misconceptions are based on something, you know, like
Right.
because back in the day or whenever. So, but now the updates are happening real quick. And that's why we need to always check what's on the website before starting off a project. I want to say this because it's important that people like maybe start something on a misconception, but then it ends up being something else. There was a lot of disappointment from students who came here thinking that eventually they will become permanent residents, and throughout their school years, it changed. So
yeah,
this can happen. So prepare yourself for that. We have to follow the rules of the country. Another question that we have, I have a visitor visa to Canada. How can I convert it to a study permit?
Perfect. Okay. And this goes in hand with what I was explaining at the beginning with the conditional letter and the pathway program. If you have a visitor visa, you're already in very big advantage. That means that you already have a previous approval to Canada, which could also increase your chances of getting a study permit approval as well. If we have the option to come to Canada as visitors, complete certain weeks of a pathway program, and get an unconditional letter of acceptance into a school in Canada, you're already over halfway done there because of the amount of documents that we're reducing. Again, we don't have to prove ties to home country anymore. Chances of approval are just higher overall based on our experience, and processing times are much faster. So if you have that option, please utilize it. But again, remember that you will need first a conditional acceptance into a program. You'll have to complete those conditions over a period of weeks or months. And once completed, submit the study permit from inside.
There's another thing that we mentioned before, but we talked about when we were preparing our session. Remember when we said that in Quebec now, they need you to be able to speak French before they give you your diploma. So I would like to talk more about this because it affects your pathway to come to Canada.
Absolutely. Great point. Thanks, Rima. So this is effective as of July 1st, so in a couple of weeks already. But starting July 1st, if you are going to graduate or if you're planning to come to study in Quebec, by the time not only of admission, you do not require to have French, but at the time of graduation, in order for you to obtain a diploma, in order for the school to issue you a diploma, you need to demonstrate a certain level of French proficiency. And this is for any program that's post-secondary in the province of Quebec. For this, you can either demonstrate a language test. It needs to be at an upper intermediate level, a CLB 7. Or depending on your previous education, you may be exempted from having to do so. For example, if you completed previous post-secondary studies in French or even elementary school, you may be exempted from doing so. But the point is that you will have to demonstrate in a way or another through a test or through previous education that you meet the requirements of the French proficiency. The program that you study in Quebec does not need to be in French. If it's in French, then there's no need for you to demonstrate any additional proof of language proficiency. But if it is in English, you need to ensure that by the time you graduate from the program, you're going to be able to demonstrate that French proficiency. And this is effective in 2 weeks. Yeah.
Joelle raised her hand. So the mic, you can open your mic, Joelle.
Yes, I just have a quick question. Can international students get financial aid in Canada for their studies?
So it truly depends, and the financial aid will fully come from the school or the university itself. But we do see a lot of universities and schools that get offered scholarships for international students, and definitely that helps a lot to reduce the tuition fees and overall the amount to demonstrating funds. As far as I'm aware, only certain really specific universities and programs do give other means of support and further scholarships based on grades, based on the program of studies. But generally speaking, international students do not get financial aid from the government, but can get scholarships and further discounts from the school and the program itself on the
Great.
tuition.
Thank you, Maria.
Yes, of course.
One last question, and then we'll wrap up.
Perfect.
We talked earlier, you and I, about some changes coming, and that speaking French can be helpful for immigration or for coming to Canada. Can you tell us more about this?
Yes. So, and again, I'm not the best example for this because I do not speak French myself, but the government has made it very clear that they want to increase Francophone speakers, Francophone immigration, specifically outside the province of Quebec. So what I'm about to tell you, think of it if you're coming or your province of destination, it's outside of Quebec. There is a program called the French Mobility Program, which allows French speakers to come to Canada, and this is separate from study permit. It's still temporary residence, but it's on a work permit, meaning that you'll be coming as a worker instead of a student. If you have a job offer in any position except for agriculture, but it could be a qualified, semi-skilled, unskilled position outside of the province of Quebec, and you can demonstrate a moderate level of French. To give you an idea, this is an extension that's just been introduced as of yesterday. Previously, we needed an upper intermediate, a CLB7 level of French, and the occupation, the job offer had to be in a qualified position, specifically in the category 0, 1, 2, 3. Now that's been removed, and the level proficiency has been dropped from CLB7, which is upper intermediate, to moderate, which is an upper basic, lower intermediate level. So if you meet with these two requirements in a job offer outside of Quebec, you could directly apply for a work permit without the need of sponsorship, which is huge for those who are hesitant to apply for jobs or having refused any job opportunities because of the sponsorship requirement. So very interesting. And thank you, Joel, for sending that link. That's the right link that you can access and you can follow more on this. Again, this was announced that just yesterday, this new changes to the Francophone Mobility Program, but it's very interesting. If you have some sort of level of French, this is your sign to improve it further, get that test done, and potentially look for job opportunities outside of Quebec, because it could land you on a work permit that could later on allow you to immigrate.
That's wonderful. At least there are still options, notwithstanding all the changes. Oh, Renoir is asking why it's except the agriculture field. Do you have an answer for that?
That I don't know. It's based on the announcement that they have made, the agricultural positions. And again, it's not all agricultural, like it's only primary agricultural positions. I'm assuming these would be field workers. There's a specific program for that. So I'm assuming it's based on that. But as the new changes get implemented in the form of regulations, I will be able to provide more details. But for now, they only said no primary agricultural positions.
So they will develop more because now they just announced it. So the more information will come in the coming days.
Yes, we expect that. Yes.
So before we wrap up, I just want to say that we're going to put the link for the feedback in the chat box, and please fill it. We would love to hear your feedback. We would love to hear any recommendations for topics for webinars, questions. So we're always here for you. So just to wrap up our session, beautiful session, I just want to tell you about our upcoming webinars. So we have a webinar about job permits. We have a webinar about taxes. I think that's a topic that's interesting for a lot of people outside of Canada and in Canada. And we have also a webinar that we're planning on cities. So it's going to be people who reside in different Canadian cities telling us about how is life in their city. And you can always follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or visit our website if you need help. You can write us an email. So we're here to answer any questions you might have. And I'll leave the floor to Maria to wrap up from her end. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you, Rima. I'll just leave our contact details here really quick. But again, you can always go to our website, www.encubate.ca. And as I said, if you're looking for any specific advice, you're looking for any specific help to your case, send us an email with your circumstances. Please mention that you attended today's webinar, and we'll be happy to get back to you with our services or any help that we can offer. But thank you all for attending. I hope it was insightful. I hope it clears some doubts on study permit applications. And we hope to see you again in any future webinars. Thank you so much, SILA, for allowing us to speak today, and we look forward to more collaborations.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this for free, because it's information that is invaluable, especially because you know, reading it is something, but having someone present it to us is something else.
Absolutely.
My understanding now is that it's super difficult to come to study to Canada. To be honest, it's not a given anymore. But at least for someone who has a good file, they still have that option. And we hope for anyone who's considering coming to Canada to continue in their process, because it's a beautiful country. And if you come, please give us a shout. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you, Rima. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.